Well, yesterday the United States marked its Independence Day, the 4th of July. That poetic, clarion declaration of liberal values remains a beacon to anyone who cherishes individual freedom and the dignity of citizens to choose their own rulers. Although he did not sign the Declaration of Independence, Alexander Hamilton is rightly considered one of the founding fathers of the United States. To him is attributed the statement, "A nation that prefers disgrace to danger is ready for a master, and it deserves one." This week, our Prime Minister made a very important speech that made it clear that the United States remains the indispensable power, despite its current internal woes and its relative decline as a military power. Significantly, his speech marked a turning point in Australian national security policy. It really was quite a seismic shift. It recognised that we need to be more self-reliant. I've been arguing on this program all year, basically, for every single measure that was mentioned in his speech at ADFA. Better cyber capabilities, hypersonic missiles for manned and unmanned aerial platforms, long-range ballistic missiles, and enhanced mine and anti-submarine warfare capabilities. It was a comprehensive package which recognises the inexorable and malevolent rise of China with its disruptive agenda to our region. It postures the Australian Defence Force to be able to hit harder, further away from our shores, and it commits us to integrating that joint force through our very own domestic space capability. Some have quibbled at the cost. Presumably they'd prefer to fund more ABC comedians, perhaps. But the Prime Minister's references to the 1930s were not overwrought or hyperbole. Full marks to him for refusing to take a knee to the latest regional bully. Let's just hope that the excellent plan Mr Morrison announced receives the sustained funding that it deserves going forward. Well, Corey, I know you're a huge fan of the previous Defence Minister and the submarine project, so what do you make of the Prime Minister's leap last week into a slightly new posture? They called it an update, but to me it looked very much a disruptive, a complete change of emphasis, frankly.
Well, them's fighting words, Catherine, and you've given me an opportunity. I will mention that I believe the submarine contract is the worst ever contract in the history of Australia. I come from South Australia, it's important to us, but it is diabolical, and I only wish the PM had revisited it as part of this statement. But I do agree with you 100% that this is an important statement by the PM. I was one of those people who, as a fiscal hawk, was not quibbling about the money. I would rather see $290 billion spent on defence with long-range missiles and some critically important infrastructure for our nation than on a whole bunch of other bailouts in other areas. So it is absolutely important. I don't know whether you had the inside running, Catherine, or whether they were listening to you every single week on this show, because you did talk about this relentlessly, consistently, with more knowledge than I could ever have, and I think more knowledge than most Australians could have. And you would certainly have done a better job in the defence ministerial role than the one in the last Parliament. And with that, I'm going back to you.
Well, it's very kind of you, Corey. I'd have to actually be a member of Parliament first for that to happen. But look, I do think, in fairness to the Prime Minister as well, there are elements of this package that are designed to hedge against that late delivery of the submarine. Some of the strike capability from unmanned aerial systems and the hypersonic missiles and the anti-shipping missiles fitted to aircraft are definite compensators for the failure of the submarine to enter service when we had hopefully anticipated. Campbell, you're ex-ADF. What did you make of it? Was it a seismic shift, or am I over-egging that?
No, look, I think it's critically important, and I think that the various initiatives within the program are just critically important, and it's just a very important policy shift. And at the moment, I'm actually reading a book called "At Dawn We Slept," and it's about the lead up to Pearl Harbor in December 41. And frankly, it's quite scary, and the Prime Minister does have every right to talk about the 1930s. And perhaps with this statement, there is a line in the sand which distinguishes from the 1930s, where Australia barely woke up about the threat to its defences, whereas with this initiative, we'd have significant power to dissuade anybody who sought to do this country harm, and particularly the long-range missiles, the hypersonic missiles, dealing with some sort of fleet out there beyond our security zone would be absolutely fantastic. My only concern, and just talking about the submarines, is it might be 270 billion now. What's it going to end up at? And I hope Defence can do a better job of procurement for once, but I don't expect it.
That's been the recurring theme, hasn't it? That the promises are never funded fully in the out years. But I think by de-shackling this from GDP percentages, the Prime Minister made his intent pretty clear. And I'm with you on that point about the 1930s. This is the first time since the 1930s that we've had totalitarian capitalist powers in the global system. And we're now about to couple it, by the look of it, with a global depression. So that was not an overworked analogy.
And Catherine, just reading this book, and sorry to butt in, but just reading this book and being reminded of that term they used back all those years ago, the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. Perhaps Daniel Andrews might want to put that up against the Belt and Road Initiative. Sounds awfully familiar, this stuff.
There's some awful echoes there. Emma, what did you make of it? You were in opposition during your career, but did you follow the 2016 White Paper with any great interest? I guess you'd have a fair ADF footprint in your former electorate, wouldn't you, in the west of Sydney?
Yeah, I had the Orchard Hills Defence Base, so we had mainly ammunitions, and then on the northern end there was the RAF base out at Hawkesbury, and then on the other side up at Glenbrook. So I was kind of surrounded by it, but I mean, to me, and we talked in our last discussion about how we've evolved from history and how our history teaches us how to behave moving forward. To me, this idea that we would need these capabilities for a third world war, and I'm a Gen Y, so I probably look at things a little bit differently, but is preposterous. And I think that we need to have a look at the cause and go back to why China is such a massive power, and then look at our own behaviour. I mean, they've had a massive tantrum over us asking for a please explain in terms of this, getting Beijing to tell us how COVID came to all of our shores. But when we keep selling things to China, like our ports and our water corporations, our electricity, we keep selling them our natural resources. And sure, we have to be a global partner, but if we're giving them this power constantly over assets that we rely on every single day, like our ports and our electricity, I think that we're walking headfirst straight into the glass door, essentially. And I think that this level of spend it's important, but and particularly with our cyber capabilities. In terms of the white paper, I got to spend some time in Afghanistan, and also I went 14 days in Afghanistan, and then was in with HMAS Canberra for about a week, and I got to see the extraordinary capabilities of our ADF men and women, and particularly in Afghanistan, where the Five Eyes and our coalition forces were situated together. What we're doing and what our ADF is already capable of is extraordinarily, fields ahead of what I saw the Yanks and Britain and a couple of our other partners contributing.
That's absolutely not the point here, and the idea that this is being geared up for World War III unilaterally by Australia is absolutely unfair. The fact is, China was in border clashes with India 2 weeks ago. It has been coercing Vietnam, the Philippines, Brunei. It has flouted an international arbitration about its militarisation in the South China Sea. The idea that this is some kind of brazen, insulting behaviour from Australia over the outbreak of COVID is simply unsustainable. This is a revisionist power that has been behaving appallingly to other Asian nations now. And I'm sorry to disabuse you of this, the very fact that we are so integrated into the US warfighting system means that if there is a cross-straits attack on Taiwan, which I think is becoming depressingly likely, Australia will be attacked as a coordinated part of that effort, because we house a large component of the US integrated space station network through our ground stations in Australia. Pine Gap is integral to the coordination of US targeting and detection of nuclear launches, and the idea that we sit this out with this bellicose regional bully, it's just not sustainable. So to blame us, as is being done, and I hear you here in your comment a very heavy inference that somehow we've provoked them, I reject that entirely. What do you think, Corey?
Yeah, well, Catherine, I don't think Emma quite characterised it as you're suggesting. Quite frankly, I thought that she said, well, we've empowered China in some ways by selling off some of our resource and providing some access. And I do think there is some truth to that. I mean, they're not some benevolent organisation or outfit in the region. You've known for anyone that wants to observe it that they are militarising the South China Sea. They're expansionists. They're absolutely nationalist, and they want to be the dominant world power in 10 years or so. So you're both right in that respect from my perspective. But I want to pick up on the point you made about these drones and unmanned vehicles, because I think they're going to be critically important. We can get those delivered relatively quickly and then actually protect our region more effectively and efficiently. And also the cyber spying. I mean, let's not pretend that China is not behind so many attempted hacks, including the stealing of our ASIO building blueprints, the national attacks on the parliament, various businesses, unions, all sorts of organisations have been targeted by the Communist Party of China. We can't continue to turn a blind eye to it, and I think the Prime Minister, without naming it, has identified very clearly to all Australians that Australia is a target, it's under threat, and we've got to do something about it. So I congratulate him for it.
Sure. So my hope that with this military spend is that, you know, by the time these things are delivered, and certainly this was the argument when I was in Parliament, was that they would be completely outdated by the time they were delivered, is a huge issue for me. I think that unmanned missiles and unmanned drones are certainly something that we need to add to the capabilities, and certainly that's what the feedback was when I was on the ground in Afghanistan from our defence personnel over there. I think, Corey, you got the right take on what I was my point that I was bringing across. And I think that we do need to go back and have a really hard look at how much power we want to give to China through all of the access that we've given them. But not only that, offshoring all of our manufacturing, I think we saw during Corona and not being able to get enough PPE here, and relying completely on China is a huge issue for us.
I think that's absolutely right, Emma, and I know that the leaping forward to unmanned systems is a giant step forward. There's been a culture of manned fighter aircraft, highly expensive platforms that we've derived from the United States, and I think that era is drawing to a close. And a couple of chiefs of Air Force to whom I spoke for a splash I did for The Australian were foreshadowing the fact that they think the manned fighter era is rapidly drawing to a close. We've got highly expensive platforms that are quite vulnerable, especially while they're refuelling away from their Australian bases. So I think your point's very well made. And if I misconstrued what you're saying, certainly take the apology. I didn't wish to jump on you at all, but I thought you were inferring that Australia had sort of provoked China through calling for the WHO inquiry, when in fact this history of over a decade now of coercing ASEAN powers has made them really unmasked as a regional bully. So if I put words in your mouth incorrectly, I'm most apologetic for that.